Here. All right, we're live.
Awesome.
I got through my checklist. All right, so how's your week been?
It's been good. It's been one of the better weeks. Physically, it felt good. Work wise, we're doing what we can for our clients. We're helping them out,
Nice.
and we're working well. We're having a good time.
Nice. And when you say work-wise, this is your work at Accenture?
Yeah, so I am a cybersecurity consultant, senior analyst, mouthful, at
Nice.
Accenture. I've been there for going on almost 24 months. We're at about 22 months I've been there,
Nice.
working in this world of cybersecurity. The cool part about what I do is that I'm not necessarily your IT SOC guy, your security operations center guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not hitting people up and saying, hey, you need to change your password. Hey, you have a virus on your computer. I did that work in college when I worked at the Student Technology Center enough that I can kind of, people believe I can learn well enough in this world to create strategies for companies and perform implementations of different types of security technology. It's been a very fun experience, to say the least. Being able to sit down with C-level executives and analyze their security posture is something that is impactful in today's business and very important for American economy.
That's a interesting term you used there. Their security posture. Is that kind of a official term you guys use in your space, or?
I think, as a young professional in this world, I can't necessarily say things are way too common, right? There's people with 15 years of experience, but I'm going to go ahead and say that it is a common phrase.
Nice.
Analyzing someone's cyber resiliency, right? To kind of put it in easier terms and in a way not tell people you suck,
Yeah, no, and like at least to me the metaphor is very interesting because it really is it's a posture you're kind of assembling for the companies, right? A position that their whole IT technology stack is going to be designed around, right? Like this one position for everything in its place. And that's interesting. That's an interesting term I hadn't heard before. So you've been doing the Accenture stuff, doing the cybersecurity, developing these strategies for people. How have you kind of gotten to the level of learning that you are at? Like, is there a lot of training you've had to do? Is it a lot of on the job you've been learning? Kind of where do you get your knowledge from? Where has it been gathered from?
Well, I would say me personally, it's from having a vested interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more I know, the less I am likely to be sitting in one of these meetings and not know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the worst things you can do in consulting is to BS, right? Most clients, especially in cybersecurity, have been there in information technology for the last 10 to 15 years in these meetings, right? So they know when you're talking, you're blowing smoke up their ass. There's instances where, and I've seen this, right, where we come in and we're coming in to kind of clean up someone else's mess, where they went ahead and tried to do something. And what they hear is, what we hear, their reflection of us, and Accenture being one of the bigger players in cybersecurity right now in the world, is they like to say, hey, you guys really know what you're talking about. It's very rare that we're talking to you guys and you guys say, oh, yeah, that's an easy solution. Bim, bam, buy this, you're done, right? No, we think we fully believe in analyzing people's, well, there's security posture, right? But there's also someone's security maturity, right? Their environment's maturity, because we kind of, everyone I think views cybersecurity a little differently, but it's not black and white, right? Some people are doing something, some people are doing nothing, right?
Yeah.
Some people are doing something that is standard, and some people are going above and beyond. And these are those big players like, we see like Amazon, Google, uh, Microsoft. They're these people who are implementing innovative solutions into their environment and to increase their security posture.
Yeah. I think one place I kind of want to start is, what is it you're reviewing? What is this thing that we're protecting with the cybersecurity? Because in your role, you're talking about analyzing, their posture and all the systems. But what are these systems that are in peril for companies, or at least that you're looking at?
Right. So I think in order to best describe this to a wide audience, it's best to start small, right?
Mm-hmm.
So on every single human being, almost every single adult, at least in America, has a smartphone, right?
Yeah.
On that smartphone, you have different types of information. Some people have their credit cards on there. Some people have, boarding passes, bank accounts connected, and that's not bad, right? Most of these phones are protected by a passcode, and if yours isn't, you definitely should. But that's essentially what we're talking about, right? These companies have data from their customers, from their employees in their computers, right? Let's say like they have a million phones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, that's what these computers are. They're pieces of hardware, stacks of storage, of processing power, data centers, right? This is what we're talking about. What is being protected? That information that is, when you sign up with a bank, you give them your social security number, your first and last name, your phone number potentially, and an email address, right?
Yeah.
All these bits of pieces of information separated apart, may not amount to much, but you put them together and you really create something which is called personally identifiable information
Mm-hmm.
that someone can essentially take this information, sell it on the deepest, darkest parts of the internet, and they can steal your identity. They can commit real crimes, right? They can start to, put credit cards in your name, buy houses, stuff that can really be detrimental to most Americans, right?
Yeah.
So this is what is of value to these companies. And some companies even go beyond that, right? Some companies do government research. And so they have certain things like developing weapons that they can't have that research being taken away by cyber criminals.
Yeah. Corporate espionage.
And cyber criminals, espionage, corporate espionage, nation attacks, right? That really brings us to kind of like who is attacking, right? There's the information that's being protected, which could be anywhere from research and development to customer information, to even just accessing your network, right? Someone can hijack your website, for example, and then all of a sudden, like, their information is going through them.
And in that sense, you're also not just like the data isn't the only thing you're protecting too. You're also protecting the hardware that kind of stores and pushes this information around as well, right? There's kind of a need to protect your router, a need to protect the server racks out there, beyond just like, putting a password on your data so that you can't get to it, right?
Right, absolutely. Like on a different side of it, like because of there's so many different types of attacks, right? What someone can do with your hardware, they can do things like create a botnet, right? A form of zombies for themselves that they can then use to attack other people. Some people will get mad at, like, I don't know, let's say like there's this thing called hacktivist, right?
Yeah.
Which is someone who acts in the form of in like a higher purpose, for example, right?
Well, these are like your anonymous in groups like this.
Exactly. So that's who we're talking about, anonymous. So let's say they don't like this construction company that's destroying, or for not specifically anonymous, but another group, right? Let's say they don't like this this oil company because they're spilling, right? These hacktivists, these eco activists, right? All of a sudden, they've created this botnet because they were able to infiltrate someone's perimeter, and now they're launching DDoS attacks against them, right? So now their website where people go and hit them up for quotes, right, is now down. They can't open that website at all.
And so, what is DDoS? So it's the denial.
DDoS is a distributed denial of service attack.
Okay, and how does that work?
How does that work? So essentially, you flood someone's computer with requests, right? Someone's application, website, any type of front-end facing environment is flooded with requests, right? Like, let's say you have a phone line, right? You can only get, let's say you have 5 lines. You can only get 5 calls at a time, right? And I'm flooding your phone with 5 calls at a time, right? From, let's say, 1,000 other phones, and you're waiting on a call to close a deal today, right? Like, let's say someone wants to buy one of your songs, right? And you're expecting that call, but someone who's competing against you floods your phone in hopes that because they can't get to you and make you a deal, they'll buy their song instead.
Huh. Interesting. So that's kind of a big favorite of these hacktivists, right? Because it's a pretty low effort kind of attack, right? You don't need to actually get into their systems. You just need to hijack a bunch of computers, right, and make them all go to that website, right?
Right, exactly. And what's funny is I've actually experienced a DDoS attack. We were living in a co-op place, right? About like 20 guys living in one shared home. And one of the people who lived with us was kind of a competitive gamer, right? He was doing really well. He was knocking out people who were world ranked top 50, and he beat the wrong guy. And that guy launched a DDoS attack against our entire home network. And we were all in the middle of finals. This was college time, right? None of us could get on the internet. Like, for the rest of the day, like, our network was just flooded. Like, we called, and this was before I even started to like really get into, and it kind of generated my interest in cybersecurity. But we were just like, what do we do? Like, we can't get on the internet. We were running a library. We were calling the cable line. We were calling, like, we didn't know who to call. Called cybercrime lines. We're like, what's
the
going
FBI.
on?
Damn.
And so we're freaking out. So eventually we just Google, and we found out there's a little trick to change kind of what DNS you're connected to, and so that seemed to work, and we were able to get our internet back. But that was one of like my first experiences of being like threatened by a cyber criminal, and it's not necessarily like the most malicious thing by any means, right? Like, like, which shows like your hacker range is huge. You have people who are felonists, like felony, like, like just felony level convicts, like. You go on the FBI's website, you can read about all these people like admitting to these crimes, right? And then it also ranges to like a little teenager who gets mad that you beat them in COD, and like it goes to show like how people have advanced beyond just cussing each other out over video games. They're now like, I'm going to destroy your network, so you can't beat me ever or anyone ever again. You can't get online.
It's the ultimate shit talking.
Absolutely. And I've had my own experiences where it's like people on my team, and I'm not even talking crap, and I'm just doing really well. And like, there's like these 6-7-year-olds had to be, they were getting frustrated because, like, I was asking them like, hey guys, like, you guys are just screaming the whole time. You mind muting yourselves when you're not on? And then all of a sudden they're like, you know what? Screw this. And they started listing off my IP address, like, my location.
Damn.
Luckily Activision's pretty good. So like, if you change your name, it's not actually your gamer tag, right?
Okay.
And so they were like finding someone in like Arkansas or something. So, but
they knew how to get to those things.
Yeah, it's not hard. All that information's online, and people could practice.
Damn.
And it's really funny. Like, there's the corporate side, which is like where we work, right? Both you and I are on the corporate side.
Yeah.
We work with data and information every day. And I would say, like, right now, the majority of college graduates in America, this is the type of world we work in, right? This is it's a huge focus right now in our American society as we have moved from manufacturing to services, right? And this is one of the services we offer to companies is to make their data smart, right? Which is why it's even more important to protect it, because if this data, if we lose it, then there's the potential to not be able to adjust through the market and fully utilize our data.
Yeah, and I think it's a world that keeps growing exponentially every year too, right? Like the amount of data we have, doubles or triples at very frightening intervals, right? To the point where we created more data in like the last year than we probably did the previous 4 years before that, right? So that's it's definitely an interesting challenge that's there. And so I want to kind of talk through a bit more of those attacks. So we're talking through DDoS. I want to talk a little bit about the Microsoft Exchange ones that we were seeing a couple of weeks ago, and how those have worked. And yeah, like what are those kind of attacks?
So those kinds of attacks are called zero-day vulnerabilities, which are essentially what it means is it's 0 day, right? Like once you have patient 0, that's the first one, right? That's the first person to get infected. So that's essentially what that means is a 0-day attack is the first time we're seeing that type of attack, right? There's vastly on the internet, you could probably Google some and find some. Accenture's is iDefense, right? We have certain places that we can find these most used vulnerabilities and exploitations and attack vectors, right? And there's new ones popping up every day, every hour, all the time. Cyber criminals are active. So what's going on with Microsoft Exchange is there are several companies, several users of Microsoft that aren't updating on a regular basis, right? And because they're not updating on a regular basis, what is being patched up is then, now known to cyber criminals, and they're like, okay, well, let's see what Microsoft patched up in this latest release. Let's go attack that vulnerability. Let's go find a way to exploit that.
So in a sense, like Microsoft is kind of telling them what to look into with releasing a patch for something they've kind of identified as a problem in a previous version, right? And you have all those people on the previous version. Well, they haven't gotten that patch yet, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
So it could be. I mean, I'm no cyber criminal myself, but these people are incredibly intelligent. If we're just brainstorming that could be a possibility for them, that's very possible, right? Microsoft is, most companies are required to kind of tell you what these customer release notes are about, right? They with updates, they'll let you know what they're updating. So it is kind of like you're giving them enough time, right? These people, not willingly, but because of the bureaucracy of it all, that these companies who are like, oh, well, I'm just going to blow off updating our Exchange network, right? Then you're allowing cyber criminals to kind of catch up with you, which is why, like you'll hear probably from anyone in IT, they'll be telling their friends and family, like, no, make sure you have updates on, and even people within their company. I'm sure people have received emails that are like, hey, your computer's out of compliance. You turned updates off. It's been a little while. You need to go ahead and refresh your screen. Same thing, right? But on a much grander scale, because they own the application, right? Like when you purchase a product from someone, like Microsoft Office, right? Let's say you buy it for your enterprise, for your company. You are then installing some of those applications. But if you have an on-prem location, on-prem, or let's say you go through their cloud provider, right? You go through their cloud provider, right? But yeah, so essentially a lot of these people on their Microsoft Exchange servers have vulnerabilities. They're being exploited. They're not updated well. And that's why we're seeing these things kind of happen. It happens a lot, very frequently.
And I mean, it makes sense too, because as an individual, it's a bit easier to, upgrade without having to worry about anything. But as a company, you have so many interlocking softwares that are doing things with different versions that, like, getting that one upgrade could break the whole thing down. So you have to be very careful with deploying stuff, to the point where you'll have a development instance and a QA instance and a production instance to make sure that you can test everything before you deploy it on the network, right?
Right, absolutely. And this ultimately, it does lead to this, is where people have legacy systems, right?
Yeah.
People have systems that are no longer supported but are vital to their infrastructure, and they just can't afford that downtime, which then leads to kind of like, okay, well, if we can't protect it on the network, let's at least like create some best practices around this, right? Let's then isolate this legacy system from the network so it's not potential vulnerabilities, or let's protect its perimeter with firewalls or network security practices. There's different things you can do, and everyone's different, right? This is purely theory. Like I've the real life examples vary so much, and there's so much history behind every company's information, right? To kind of look at every company and say like, oh, like my cookie cutter solution works, no problem, sign right here, is very ignorant to that company's history. It's very ignorant, and that's why we kind of analyze the full posture, right? That's why any security professional who's going in there and changing people's environment should try and like recognize what is best for their client.
Yeah, and I think that's a tough one there. Every company has such a unique infrastructure and setup, and so that's kind of where you guys come in. One part though that I think is interesting there is the question of, you have the software, right, and you can figure out how to put up these firewalls and do all this security stuff through the software and the hardware. But you also have the people to think about. And so you have attacks like phishing attacks and just social engineering attacks where, a hacker's able to convince you that, you have to reset your password through this one link. And now they have access to a bunch of your company's data. And how do you deal often with how to, control for that at a company level or at, individual level as well?
So I would say, yeah, right. Like, we do have an incident response branch of Accenture Cybersecurity. And if you want someone really good to follow on Twitter for that would be Justin Harvey. That man is well known throughout the cybersecurity world. He leads that practice. He's a great person.
Yeah.
But I would say that, like definitely having a good security culture is important for most companies, right? And I think that's where you hear of a lot of things, right? Social engineering tests and violations. And to list one really big one that most people probably heard about is the Twitter verified hack, right? This was an issue of an employee falling victim to a social engineering test where they literally received an email that said, hey, change your password, and follow this link. And they're like, oh crap, like I'll go and change my link. And this is where that's a problem, right? We all fall victim to things. Like I'm not gonna sit here and say I haven't received that text message saying like, oh, your Wells Fargo funds are low, right? And I'm like, what? But the thing is, I don't go ahead and click that link. I'll go ahead and check on the application. I'll go ahead and use what I know is a secure vector of accessing my bank account to check if my password needs to be changed, right? And so that's kind of the security culture you want to establish within your company, is to kind of question anything that comes by your desk, and question like whether what you're doing, whether what you're sharing, if that's okay, right? Like people, as you're building, let's say like you're building an Excel and someone's asking you to populate it with people's salaries, for example, right? That is sensitive information. That's something you don't want people to get a hold of, because let's say you have one employee who's making $1 million a month or $1 million a year, right? They're making $1 million a year, and all of a sudden someone finds that out. They're going to become a victim of these phishing accounts, these phishing, emails, and getting people to give them their bank information. So it's always like questioning, like, okay, is what I'm doing, like, what should I do then? Should I protect this? How can I protect it? Right.
Yeah.
And this varies across several different areas, right? If you're emailing that stuff, encrypt that email, right? Put the permissions on it, make it confidential. Don't let this email be forwarded, right? Keep the control. It's always about like, and then this varies a lot, right? Like people on their day-to-day have touched thousands of software, right? But it's about being conscious of it. And that's why what I think is really fun, and some people don't appreciate it as much, are these social engineering tests performed by corporations, right?
Ooh.
Where it's sort of this red team attitude, and red team in the term is like testing your people, right? Testing your people, your environment, your network,
Running
to see
scenarios. Yeah.
exactly. So testing them by sending an email that is a phishing scam, right? And making it look as legit as possible, and seeing who falls victim to that. And I know some people, like, probably what's best is not like once you get it wrong, be like, oh, you're fired, like, you failed this test. But if it's continual, right? Like if someone's like failing like 5 to 6 times, then you got to have like, okay, you need more training, you need more discussion, we need to increase our culture. We're failing to fully turn you into a security conscious person, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's when you're like, okay, you failed 10 in a row. We do need to fire you. You don't know how to keep your mouth shut, right? So yeah,
I can see it as kind of as part of the performance review practice, right, or the merit reviews, where in the different categories you're evaluating your employee at, like security practices might be a good one to start including, because it's something that's very critical, and a way to kind of fine and fine tune those human links that can become a pesky, it can become a big issue depending on your situation. In Twitter's case, it was pretty bad having all their verified accounts hacked in the span of 4 hours, and it was that one was just a hacktivist too, right? It was just like a
I think it was a Bitcoin scam. So it wasn't necessarily a hacktivist group. I think it was people trying to actually get money from people. But so I'll say one more thing about that though. Like, yes, the people should be responsible for what, like, right, and their performance should kind of be evaluated. But it's kind of a bare minimum, right? Like to become a secure person nowadays, it's not that hard. But what I will say is that hack itself, in that specific case, was also an issue of not exercising the principle of least privilege at a company, right? This individual had access to admin software that allowed him to change people's emails and passwords for no good reason, right? So this person had access. They never reviewed why he had this access, and that speaks towards this company's maturity, right? Of having that documentation and ticketing of like, okay, he asked for this access here. He was done needing that. Like, let's say he did have a purpose for that access, right? Like, even if they gave it to him, they should have revoked it once he didn't need it, right? So it's kind of this attitude of like, there's plenty of blame to pass around, right? Yeah. Like, it's not just the employee. Maybe the employee got fired, right? Maybe Twitter would try to save their ass. I haven't read enough about it, but what I do say is, like, it's never just one thing, right? It's always a series of things, which is why we diagnose like someone's maturity, right? Like someone's cybersecurity maturity. In the same way that like people make mistakes, like it's never just like like one validation for that mistake, right? Their maturity comes into question on it, like their character, certain things of why they made that mistake. And we try to analyze that and improve, right? Like, just as human beings do that, we do that with corporations, right?
Yeah. So that's what I will say. Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking about it too, because in essence, you're saying that like the corporation has learned from its experiences and developed this kind of maturity with their security practices, and it could be either from watching it happen to other people and paying attention, or having stuff happen to them themselves, right? And having to change themselves. But it's interesting to think of an organization kind of learning like that and defining it that way. You used another term there though that caught my eye. You said the least privilege. And so I think based on what you were saying, it's a principle of making sure that you only have the least privilege necessary.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's kind of like, I'll try and do this in as layman terms as I possibly can. Right. Let's put it this way. Let me think of a good example. I'm trying to think of one. Okay, I got one. You have a car, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have your car and you have your driver's license, right? Like you can go and use your car freely, right? This is for you to get from point A to point B, and that's it, right? Let's say you have a child, and that child is he has his learner's permit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So his learner's permit only allows him to drive before curfew and certain different things, right? Because we understand that that kid can't be out past curfew, right?
Yeah.
So why would we allow him to be out past curfew on his learner's permit if he legally cannot be out past then, right?
Yeah. That makes
So it's
sense.
like if he doesn't need that permission, we're not going to give it to him,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's
I do feel with
Go ahead.
children that's a bit less fair, but definitely in the terms of what access you should have, with companies' proprietary data or other employees' personal data or customers' personal data, like that seems like a very fair kind of rule to keep in place. It can be very tedious as someone who's been on the other end of that, but
Right.
At the end of the day, this is people's valuable information that could create a world of pain for them if it got into the wrong hands.
Mm-hmm. And I'll also put it in. Let me put it in a more professional example. This is maybe people will understand this one. Well, at least like people who work in this type of world. Let's say you are a database admin, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm let's say I'm support, right? Like I'm support and I need access to, when you call your bank, you say, oh, I lost my credit card. They're like, okay, well, let me verify that this is you, right? They then can read back, they're like confirm your social security number with you, your phone number with you. So they need access to that information, right? So that they can see that. You as a database admin don't need to focus on what is in that data, right? You don't need the specifics of those numbers. What you need to know is how that data is moving and flowing from, let's say, from the application that ingests it. Let's say that would be like when you sign up for your bank account online, right?
Mm-hmm.
You ingest that information there. That's that ingestion point. You as the database admin are only concerned with that flow of that data. You don't care what that data is. So therefore, you don't need permission to be able to read that data.
Yeah.
The support person doesn't need the permission to be able to move that data, right? Mm-hmm. They just need to be able to access that data and read it to confirm your identity to then help you out how you will over the phone.
Yeah.
Right? So that's how you exercise least privilege, right? You make sure that the people who need the access, and certain different types of access, right? There's the ability to move stuff around. There's the ability to read it. There's the ability to write it, right?
Yeah.
The application only needs the permission. The application ingesting needs the permission to be able to write it into the database. The database admin needs to be able to move it. And then the support person needs to be able to read it, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to give anyone the full access.
Yeah.
That would be the worst thing possible because that person can then, in a way, like all these people can fall victim.
Yeah.
All of them can. But if all of them fall victim, then they only have certain abilities, right? They can't do whatever they want to this data, and they can't maliciously steal it.
I think it makes the job harder for anyone trying to attack the data, right? And I think one of the terms that you were using too that was interesting was the attack vector. I think is that kind of where that term comes from, like, let's say if you have a system where one person does have full access to everything, they kind of become an attack vector where someone who's trying to get their hands on the data can very much focus their attempts to, either this one person or that group of people who they kind of can guess have full access to everything, right?
Exactly. Or let's say like they know this application does all those things, right?
Yeah.
Then they're like, okay, well then there's the gold mine. Let's go attack it.
Yeah.
Like they can start to pick out their attack vector, right? There's different other things, like millions and millions of other examples, and people can name all of them. There's different ways to access people's systems, but that's what we're trying to do is protect those different vectors with these broad best practices, principles, standards that exist out within these governing organizations. So I mean, it's interesting. And that's why people make a career out of being a cyber criminal. It's because there's millions of attack vectors to find.
Yeah. I think like there's very different ranges of cyber criminals here, right? You have like just your, low time, like, petty theft criminals that are just like doing DDoS attacks on certain websites and coordinating different small time attacks like that. Then you have like criminal organization cybercrime people who are, doing ransomware attacks on cities and, like fucking shutting down essential services and trying to attack different areas. And then you have state-sponsored criminals as well who are actively looking to see how can they, destroy our utility grid and cause a Texas across the whole U.S. And it's a wide range. I think. What do you normally see in kind of your world? Like, is your criminal mostly criminal organizations? Or are you looking more at low time hackers? What are the kind of criminals that you are on the lookout for?
Mm-hmm. So just to throw some terminology out there, the wide range of actors, right? So we're talking about hacker kitties, which are, like I'm saying, like those kids on the phone, right? Those kids in that video game, like telling me that they're going to find me and swat me, right? Yeah. Like those are your hacker kitties, right? People who are like kids who are like, oh, I just guessed someone's password, right? And I got access to their thing. You have hacktivists, right? Like Anonymous. You have cyber criminals who go by their own names, right? Like who like they're on their database. We have their aliases, right? Like a lot of them, because there's people who go and investigate on the dark web, right? They go and see on the Onion router, like they go and see who they are, like who are these people like posting all this stuff, right? And I've personally never been on a dark web, mostly because I believe it might be a crime itself to get on the dark web. And also I'm a little scared to see what's on there. And then you have nation states, right? This is where, like in America, where we're talking about state-sponsored attacks, like from Russia, right? And these type of misinformation campaigns that come along our table that kind of, became huge in 2016, right? And I'll put it this way, like as popular as these attacks are getting, right? I think in the last year alone, spending for cybersecurity grew by something ridiculous, like 67%. And please, like, check if I'm right or wrong, and like let me know. But it was something ridiculous.
The beauty of podcasts is that you can be a little bit wrong. People excuse you for it. So it was a significant amount, is what we're talking about here.
Extremely significant, like to the point where like we haven't stopped hiring. We didn't stop hiring because of the pandemic. We started hiring more because of the pandemic, because the pandemic also led to a series of misinformation campaigns. People were out here thinking, oh, this virus, it's a hoax. It's a hoax. It's not real. It's nothing. It's just like the flu, right? And you had people also saying, oh, the vaccine, the vaccine will cause cancer, for example, or, like they were saying the virus was manufactured in a lab, right? All these misinformation campaigns that tear apart a society, right? Like to a brink, like people, like to put it this way, because if there was no misinformation campaign, right? Like if we were actually getting the honest to God truth facts out there with scientific research papers and stuff, right? And not just these memes that say like coronavirus is a hoax, then we probably wouldn't have had as many people die, like as many people just emboldened by what they're seeing on the internet on a day-to-day basis and getting confirmation bias, right?
Yeah, I think it's like crazy things that we do to ourselves now, like spreading all this disinformation and hate and arguing with each other over
it makes me laugh because I just thought of something like the truth is, like, sometimes we dig ourselves into that hole, right? Like you can Google whatever you want and convince yourself you're right. You could Google, like you could literally go ahead and Google, is the earth flat? And you will convince yourself with enough time, you will convince yourself the earth is flat. And that's what we're talking about, like, is prevalent in our society, and why like cybersecurity is so important, and being conscious of like not believing everything you see on the internet, which is tough because I think we grow up in a world where, the first person that tells us something is our parent, right? And they tell us, kind of in a black and white world, and we just believe it, right? We're nowadays, like, the internet is now our educator, right? Then we go in the education system and we hardly ever question in school, like, oh, is that true? Like, is that fact true? Is that really what America was? Like, you know what I mean? Like, people speaking like, oh, like, yeah, slavery was a necessary evil. Like, what? Like, are you kidding? Like we never stopped to question that stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
people are literally told that. And so that's the purpose the internet serves, of like keeping us all in the same school of thought later in life, right? And so it's a point of like, that's why like you'll see in college education that people are performing so many research papers and their research is so readily funded, right? Because people, the concern isn't that we're wrong, right? They don't want to be, is that they don't want to be proven wrong. It's that we want to be proven right, right? With experimentation and constantly. And this information campaign, these misinformation campaigns just make it hard, right? Make it hard when there's a blob of people that just refuse to believe the facts.
Well, and I think like part of the problem is, you know, the some of the powers that the internet gave us as human beings were like, you know, we like to think about one metaphor of like you know, your passwords and your locks that you have for your stuff. Like in the real world, human beings will tend to be kinder because we have to interact with each other one-on-one, right? But on the internet, I can try to hack 1,000 of my friends and no one will ever know that it was me, you know? And so it gives us this power to do things without like the feedback loops we've kind of evolved into ourselves, you know, where like, shit, I want to belong in this society, so I can't screw you over, you know, you're my friend, you're gonna help pick the bugs off my hair at one day, so like I'm gonna be nice to you. And so it's created problems in society, and it'll be interesting to see how, you know, the aeons of evolution we've had will allow us to adapt to this new world, because I also think it's kind of necessary if we hope to, you know, become interplanetary species and kind of, you know, get to that level 1 society. But yeah, that the internet has created kind of this potential for that. I want to talk a bit more about the strategies we're using to secure it, both like from a legal standpoint and from a technological standpoint. You know, like one of the first examples that I was talking about there was the idea of the lock, and that came from a CGP Grey video that I'd seen where he talks about encryption and kind of the goal of the lock makers here, the people who are creating encryption, to create, you know, an unbreakable encryption, compared to the goal of like the criminals who are trying to figure out how to create the ultimate key, right? And so I want to segue there, not as eloquently as I thought I would, but into the question of encryption here.
Sure. So, I mean, encryption very generally, right, is a form of protecting our information, our plain text, right? And there are various forms of encryption, right? But generally, what we would say is that, for example, like let's say I want to send a message to Nahum, right? I want to send a message to you. And what I'm saying to you is just hello, right? Let's say I'm just saying hello. And we're going to use the broadest example ever. It's called Caesar's key, right? Which is a key of the number 3. So that number 3 will transform our data, right? We're going to use that key and apply it to our data, our message, hello, right? So hello is the H. We'll start with the H. The H is the first letter of the alphabet, or it's the 8th letter of the alphabet. So if we use a key of 3, right, we can either add or subtract from that letter. So we're going to go ahead and add to the 8th letter. We're going to go 3 letters down, which would make it A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. Right? The 11th letter would then be K. So then we'll transform the rest of the phrase. I'm sure it'll be something unrecognizable, right? So now hello is something we can't fully interpret, right? It's some other jumbled word. I then put that letter and I give it to a messenger, right? And let's say you and I had met before this and I said, hey, if I ever send you a message, I'm going to use the key of 3, right? I let you know what that key is. You now have my key. We both have that key. I give that message to the messenger. And let's say that messenger is some nosy person who should probably get fired. And he busts open that letter. He's like, okay, this doesn't make sense to me. I'll just put it back. Gets you that letter, right? and then you get that letter, you look at it, and you decrypt it. So you take away 3, right?
Yeah.
Then you say, you're like, oh, he said hello to me. You have the message, and we securely were able to transfer that message to you. That is a form of encryption.
Okay.
So now we've protected that message from people who didn't need to read it. So you were able to read that message, and I was able to read that message. Right? That's the same concept when it comes to encryption in a lot more complicated ways. Like I'll say right now, like there's this different method where like you literally transform the sentence into a rail, like an up and down mountain of letters. And then you apply the key and you transform it in a completely nuanced method. Like people are just artists with figuring out encryption methods, right? And that's where we're talking about like advanced encryption standard, right? AES or SHA, right? SHA 256. And so this method of encryption and hashing, right? And there's a difference between, like our example is an encryption. Right? We turned our plain text to ciphertext. But there's also other methods of providing a digital signature to a file, right? Making sure that I was the last one to modify this file, right? And putting an encrypted message onto that source code, right? Letting you know, essentially, I was the last one to modify this message. And if someone else were to modify it, then that digital signature would be destroyed, right? You would know, hey, this was modified. This is a message that I was not intended to receive. Then there's also the method of tokenization, right? Obfuscation, de-identifying, right? So basically turning, let's say like a social security number, you know how you'll see it's a 9, I believe it's 10 numbers?
3, 2, 4.
It's 9. It's 9.
Okay.
So it's 9 numbers. Right. And so everyone kind of understands what the social security, like if you look at it, like you would be like, okay, that's a social security number, right? The 3-2-4. Right.
It's pretty obvious.
So masking and would be a way of like making those numbers random, right? Into a different method, I believe. And then there's also tokenization. Tokenization would turn it to like 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right?
Yeah.
These are methods. These are other methods of protecting the data. So someone can be like, okay, this is a series of social security numbers, right? Still kind of like that format preserving encryption, right? So to speak. Credit card numbers stay the same because with some of this encryption methods, you don't necessarily retain the structure of that data, right? Like for example, I've seen encryption methods in my own work where I may open a spreadsheet and it looks like a spreadsheet with social security numbers, right? This is that format preserving. And then there's other methods where I open it and it's completely unreadable. Like you're like, I have no idea what this is. Like I have no idea what the purpose of this document is, and I can't interpret a damn thing out of it.
Yeah.
Those are the types of different methods we use to protect our data.
Yeah.
And then there's also different things like encrypting a drive at rest, right? So, I mean, it's a very broad scope there.
That's a big encrypting a drive at rest is the we've been working on an encryption project on our end where we're trying to kind of be able to identify email of a customer. But you never want to put PII into links and stuff like that. And so we're working through kind of an encryption method with a vendor to, be able to communicate, that person's that person. And it's interesting with those kind of methods where, on our end, we're using somewhere it's the SHA 256 where it's not one of those format preserving. You can actually not even decrypt the message, right? Like, it's encrypted in a way that destroys the information essentially, but it always encrypts it the same way. So on the receiver's end, if they have the same list, they can encrypt it and they'll be able to match there. But, with only the encrypted message, you can never get back to your original message. And it's interesting looking at all these different encryption methods and kind of trying to figure out where the best practice is for each one, because in some, it's fine to lose your format, lose the message, and others, you can't do that, right?
Right, absolutely. And that's why you kind of need those subject matter experts to kind of step in there and analyze your environment and not be ignorant to your company's history, right? Like we keep bringing it back to this point, to acknowledge a corporation and what it is they're doing, because you can't just broadly be like, oh yeah, apply the solution. But if it doesn't do what I need it to do, then what's the point, right? I just spent millions of dollars on this product I don't need, And so that's why you bring in someone like Accenture, like Deloitte, all these different consulting companies to come in and kind of analyze your environment and not give you an ignorant answer.
Yeah, it's one of those things you need people to be really paying attention to what the problem is you're trying to solve and how to solve it the most secure way. One other part I think that's really interesting is the whole concept of encryptions is also kind of the whole groundwork of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, right? I mean, that's where kind of the crypto comes from the cryptography of having to decode these encryptions.
Right. So I think the concept of a digital ledger is something that is very nuanced, right? And for those people who may not understand what that means, when you make a sale, you get a receipt, right? Mm-hmm. That receipt, that's stored on our system too, right? And so we validate that, we made this sale to you.
Yeah.
But you could also have your own book, right, on your end, where you're like, okay, I spent this much money on this product, right?
Yeah.
If our books don't match up, we could have a problem, right? We could have an argument like that. Those are certain things that happen. And so Bitcoin specifically, right, the big cryptocurrency that everyone's talking about, is specifically a way of validating financial transactions, right? And so these coins represent different blocks on this blockchain that is Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right. And so essentially Bitcoin is that block is an encrypted transaction and that hash, right? Mm-hmm. And that hash is a combination of data from the first block and the next block, right? So this kind of, or I think it's of the current block and the block before it, actually.
Okay.
So it's the current block and the block before it. And so then you have validated that this is the next block in that chain, right? And therefore you have this fully validated and encrypted and protected ledger, right?
Yeah.
And so the big challenge with cryptocurrency that we see today is data sharing, right? Like that's kind of what corporations are thinking about. They're like thinking like, okay, like the data that came to us from like, let's say, a university, right? Let's say UCLA, just because alma mater and they're playing today. Let's say they gave you their research data, right? And you want to make sure that the data that company A received is the same data that company B received, right?
Yeah.
You could use a distributed or a digital ledger to validate that you have the same data as the other person. And then therefore you can then start to perform certain things. And so when it comes back, it's been validated that transformation on that ledger is yours, right? Or that it's valid and it's trusted essentially by all parties.
That's pretty, I mean, that's going to be a bit, groundbreaking too in the area of, I think, like logs and keeping track of how your data is used and where it's used, because right now, you have to code in logging to a system and it's prone to failure. But if logging is inherent to the system and it's kept in a decentralized manner, it, provides a lot of good opportunity to have more transparency in kind of how data is used in different applications. Yeah, that's interesting.
It's a more cybersecurity like view on blockchain, which is like what blockchain is, right? Like blockchain became exciting because of the digital currency and the thought of what that ledger could mean for a decentralized currency, right? That isn't backed by a government entity. I mean, it's definitely exciting as far as like information goes and validating that everyone has the same data, right? And for me, like I think about it in this way, like let's say just because illegal immigration is something like that, I think we need to change by making it easier to legally immigrate, right?
Yeah.
And one way for me to believe that is possible is that we can have transparent sharing of information with other countries whose refugees or people are applying to immigration here, right? We can validate their records.
Yeah.
We can validate who they are, who they were in their home country. We're kind of, and kind of like be able to expedite and integrate machine learning and artificial intelligence into these systems that are then analyzing immigration profiles, and kind of be like, okay, like this should not be that hard for that many people, and it's kind of like, it makes it easier for us to validate their information.
I think, that's a lot of interesting applications for that. One part that scares me a bit there, though, is the question of like policing and data and encryption, and how that's kind of going to underlay, because I'm reminded of the case with I believe it was San Bernardino. There was a shooter who they believed had terrorist ties, and so the FBI started asking Apple, hey, break your phone for us, crack your phone for us, and at least from what we're led to believe, Apple's systems are pretty much unbreakable because they're encrypted within the device itself. And so even Apple wouldn't necessarily be able to crack into it. But that question of like, the policing systems are kind of always going to be wanting to be able to have access to this data because, sometimes there are emergencies they need to respond to. And so having access to the data could be really helpful. But it's getting to a point where a lot of information is in our systems. It's no longer just like the question of, should police be allowed to break into your house to prevent a bomb from exploding versus should police be allowed to access every single photo, every single conversation, every single kind of memory you've created on your devices. And it's like a double-edged sword as we try to digitize, our human world, and as, our police actors try to gain more access to that. It's there's a lot of application there. I think
right. So you're right. I'll say you're absolutely correct. There's huge implications by these government agencies trying to get into systems and saying, hey, make me a backdoor. Like we've seen hacks that are literally backdoor hacks, like because they put a backdoor in their system, like they became themselves vulnerable to attacks, right? And so what I will say is I'm happy Apple put their foot down. I'm happy they were like, no, we're not doing that. Like that's probably going to jeopardize our security, our security posture in the world. And for me, I would have to agree with them, right? Like I would have to say, hey, like putting in a backdoor doesn't mean shit. Don't let the FBI misconstrue you. They can get into your phone. If they want to, they can brute force your phone. They will get that information. It's just how much easier you make it for them so they can, prosecute a case quicker, but they will get that information. I guarantee you. And they probably, I think they got that phone. The San Bernardino case,
ended up breaking
they got in anyways, so it's like, so they asked for it and they got in. So it didn't really matter. Like, and I think, okay, good on Apple. Like, good on them. Like we have a right to our privacy, man. Like I really believe that. And so it's kind of like, it's a double-edged sword because we also rely on the government to be the person to prosecute when someone violates our privacy, right? Like for them, the FBI is the agency that prosecutes crimes, cyber crimes, right? So it's kind of like they're like they are meant to act in our best interest, right? But sometimes they can get beyond themselves, right? Kind of like over policing, like like know your limits, and it's going to be hard, but it's ultimately a greater good that it's hard for you to get into our information.
No, I think I would agree with that. I think one part where that does lead us to, though, is the question of like how far away are our laws and rules surrounding all the systems from where they need to be, right? Like we've taken a lot of strides forward with things like GDPR and CCPA protecting consumer data, but I'm curious kind of where the legal landscape is. First, a question of how easy is it to prosecute cybercrimes, because a lot of times it's pretty difficult to find out who is behind all of this computers and networks, right? Because they're intentionally hiding their identity. And so, like, there's that question, and there's a question of, like, are the laws in the books there yet? Are they ready to handle these kind of crimes?
Well, I'll say this. There are just as many as there are cyber criminals, like really, really good cyber criminals.
Mm-hmm.
We also have really, really good cyber defense people. There's people who maybe they learned all these skills, like thinking like, oh, I want to be a cyber criminal. And then they saw, well, why don't I just like go with the law, man? Why don't I just like go on the good side of the good guys, become a good guy and help out people who fall prey to this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something. I met these two people in training who were in their later 20s who had the brilliance of a hacker like I have never seen, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like these guys, their goal was to like investigate these hacks as we did like a capture the flag activity. And they were just absolutely phenomenal. Like going back and forth on strategies. They sat there for days, just like flipping through like what could have been the attack vector on this attack so I can go back and replicate it and then find the flag that is the signature of this attack, right? Yeah. And a lot of these cyber criminals are kind of egotistical, man. Like they want to leave their mark on their attacks. You know,
well,
like
you can kind of tell with the
like, you know, like that's why we can find out who they are is because they have the same methods, they have MMOs, like they know what they're doing. They're like leaving behind.
Yeah, like the little breadcrumbs. I'm reminded of the heist guy from Rick and Morty with the little origami thing. He left a calling card. You know, it's like they love they create a reputation for themselves. You know, it's a place where you're respected. I mean, to the point where we sort of glorified in a couple shows now, like Mr. Robot. Edward Snowden, like where you know, his attack was more human, but still, like, you know, Julian Assange, like, we've kind of created a world where, you know, these I don't know, some worse than other actors, you know, gain a reputation for themselves because of some of the crazy shit they do.
Absolutely. And look, I'm going to say this because I keep seeing it every time I see any movie, show, or anything, and it harps back to like, oh, okay, my job's pretty cool, is that there's always something about cybersecurity there. Yeah. Like in Star Wars, for example, right? In Star Wars, they were trying to steal an encryption key from like an Empire base, right?
Yeah.
Rogue One is itself a cyber heist. Like if you think about it, like it's literally they social engineer their way into an Empire base, steal the plans for the Death Star, and then transmit them using their own system to Leia Organa. That whole movie is itself a cyber heist, and that's one of the coolest things about my job is like watching these things and be like, that actually happened.
Yeah,
that happened. You know, like
this was well researched.
Yeah, like exactly, and that's why I always think like there's got to be some hackers in the Hollywood world, in the Hollywood consulting world. You know, like where they're like, the movies are like, we need to bring in IT consultants for this. You know, and I will say this as well as like hacker groups. Hacker groups are very open to law enforcement, right? They love interacting with law enforcement. DEF CON, right? Or the Cult of the Dead Cow, right? Cult of the Dead Cow is a big hacker group in America. And their first convention, they invited the FBI.
They host conventions is the first. Like, this is completely the guy from Rick and Morty now.
In Las Vegas. Yeah, like, there's this convention where companies come, and so many, you know, just come and give talks and experts give lectures there. It's a huge world. I haven't been to one because of coronavirus and everything, and I really wanted to go to one. But what I will say is like there was a guy who went and did a lecture on blockchain, and he calculated a Bitcoin by hand for like one session.
Damn.
and so that's crazy. The thing is like all this stuff, blockchain isn't anything like outlandish, right? Yeah. Like it's clever. It's clever for sure and very intelligent, but it's nothing like it's nothing crazy to understand, right? And so the thing is, like, what, right? Once, like, the time it takes you to calculate that, someone probably already mined that Bitcoin. But, like, you know, like, that's the thing, is like, that's how it works, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, there is these huge conventions, and law enforcement is always invited to them.
that is hilarious. So those are the kind of, you know, activist actors, you know, that you're talking about there. How does, like, is the world of the big time criminals, so like, what are the state actors more? Here's what I'm talking about here. So things like, what is it, Green Bear, the Russian person that got all the DNC email servers, right? How do you prosecute something like that, where you have, you know, a bunch of people who are pretty much acting for the government? You know, they're a part of that organization. And do you think we have our own hacker groups as well on our end?
Absolutely. And I don't know if you're talking, because I just found this one. It's Fancy Bear.
Fancy Bear.
Cozy
There we go.
Bear?
Yeah, I don't remember the name. Probably Fancy Bear.
Yeah, it says Fancy Bear, likely. Yeah, so it says Fancy Bear.
Yeah.
The Cozy Bear is also hacking sensitive groups. But yeah, we have those groups as well. Anonymous, right? For example. Look, I think this one just popped up. The Shadow Brokers.
Ooh.
Yeah, like there's all these groups, right?
Yeah.
And they exist everywhere. A lot of them are, you know, some are malicious, some are actually like working on the side of government and always willing to, you know, to comply and help them out, right? And do these consulting because they pay, right? Like they give them money for it. It's not like these services come free, but they're willing to help out. And it's a very complex world. So absolutely, right? So the big question to me is like, when is the U.S. going to go on the offensive, right? and I think, in my opinion, we already are. Like, I don't know how many people will believe that, but I'm sure we are just as involved in Russia's elections as they are in ours, right? And as much as China's trying to hack into us, I'm sure we're trying to hack into them, right? It's just something that's under wraps and it's very top secret. Do I have much evidence to go on it? Besides the NSA already being able to hack into most people's service, like, no, I don't have a lot of evidence that like one-on-one evidence. I don't have it, but I'm sure it's already happening. We for sure have groups of people who, you know, are working in this capacity. Yeah. And there's also, to me, I just think it's inevitable. Like, we have to be doing it. People are doing it to us. The U.S. never takes anything too lightly, you know, and it's like, how could we imagine we don't have a huge cyber defense space when we're like, there was an arms race. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a cyber arms race and we just never heard of it, you know?
And like the secret cyber war. I mean, it's made more believable too by, like, I was watching documentary about how the military kind of organizes its branches, right? And so they have commands, right? So they have land command, they have sea command, they have and I'm totally using the completely wrong word for them, but they have commands over domains of war or domains of battle,
right? Air, sea, space.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
And in that segment I was watching, they were talking about how, like, really cyber is a command that we're really looking into as well, because, you know, it seems a lot of countries do have, you know, their sophisticated cyber warfare systems being propped up, right? And so we're looking into creating its own, with Space Force, Cyber Force too. So it's
what I'll say is that, like, I've seen in the world of cybersecurity a lot of ex-military. A lot of ex-military. And that I think that should say it all, right? Like, if these people are coming out with
this
cyber defense experience, like, you know, like, they might not talk about it.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it's going on, you know, like.
I mean, you can even at least imagine in the encryption and that side of space where it's like, yeah, probably some of the smartest minds in encryption were working for the military and to make sure that our
absolutely.
defense secrets are not going out. Yeah.
I mean, technology begins in the military, right? That's the common saying that people say, like, and it's kind of true, right? Like, radios come from the military, sonar comes from the military, missiles, rockets, right? Everything, like guns. Even Caesar's key, right? Caesar was this great general. Like, that's why he had encryption, because he needed to communicate with his generals. He needed his messengers, if they got jumped, like, not to have that information like fall into the wrong hands.
Yeah.
So literally, security does kind of originate. Now, the reality is that because there's so much ability to make profit in this world now, right? That now our enterprises are vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it, like, the people who are often hacking, like, our corporations, are the same people we consider our enemies around the world.
Yeah.
You know?
That is interesting. I think you were talking a little bit there about value, and I want to talk a bit there about too, like, why is there so much energy spent on these kind of attacks, in the different spaces? Because I can kind of get it for things like, Equifax, or things like hacking your personal computer, because they can sell those social SSNs there. But what are some of the different kind of values people are finding, and how are they getting this investment to keep hacking people?
The investment comes from the people who are buying. You put that stuff on the dark web and people will buy it, right?
Yeah.
That information, even if it's just, I don't know, let's say it's like your RuneScape password, for example, right? Like, there could be someone who resells RuneScape items, right? And that person pays people to give them a bundle of items. Those items are probably getting hacked. You know what I mean? Like, there's a possibility of that being true. And this is where, like, people place that value. But on top of that, like, right? Like, let's say someone's taking, like, your Twitter password. Big deal, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever. Like, it's my Twitter. I'll just make another one. Well, what if you're the type of person to use the same password on every account? Like, that is a harsh reality in America. People use the same password for every account.
Yeah.
And then you could take their identity, right? So it's like I'm saying, like, it's these different vectors. Like, you go from point A to point B in a different way. But ultimately, people want is your personal information. That's what provides a lot of value, and that's why you need to be careful in your own life. And when you're dealing with your company, you need to be conscious of it. That's why they hired you. That's why they pay you so well. Is because they believe, like, you're going to do your job well, which includes protecting their interests.
Yeah, I think, to me, in that vein, like, one of the most interesting, or like one of the types of attacks that always leaves me shocked is the ransomware attacks, because rather than take your information to sell it, they just assume this information is going to be the most valuable to you. So I'm going to ask you to pay me for it. I'm going to hold it hostage, and now you're going to have to pay me for it. And then, at the scale of a person, that could mean $500. But we're looking at this happening at the scale of cities. I think Atlanta, Birmingham, and I think another school district somewhere else all had ransomware attacks where all of the school system data and all of the city data was blocked off from them. They couldn't provide services to people. Unemployment, for some of the utilities, like, they were super slowed down, and they were asking for hundreds of thousands of dollars, all in Bitcoin, by the way.
But always in the encrypted currency, right? Where you can't be traced. But these attacks are horrible. And the honest to God truth is, there's not a lot of people who hold our cyber infrastructure accountable, right? Like, in the same way that we're making all these bills to increase our roads and everything, what about our public groups' cyber infrastructure? Like, we're not doing a whole lot there. or at least I don't know about it. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure you know a whole lot about it, but it's kind of like, look, like the truth is, like, we need to be as invested in our cyber infrastructure as much as we are in our actual infrastructure, right? Disaster doesn't just come in our energy grid breaking down during a winter storm, which it did here in Texas, but it also comes in the form of losing the people's data that we're supposed to be taking care of, right? Our citizens, our students. And in my opinion, in my dark opinion, I think these hacker groups are out of line asking for millions of dollars, ask as much as they're going to get fined from the agency. You know what I mean? Like, make it kind of like opportunity cost. Like, you could pay 10 million to when they find the violation, or you can pay us, you know, $500,000 or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, something in a reasonable range.
Yeah.
But it sucks. I mean, these companies, like, all they need is a simple backup, right? Like, when they commit these ransomware attacks, like, they're essentially what they're doing is they're encrypting it, and I'm the one with the key, and I'm like, I'm not giving you the key unless you pay me $1 million for this key. You know?
In the case of the Atlanta one, though, which is crazy, because they were using a super common system, outdated, nobody knew, there was a specific bug for that one that also went after the backups and deleted them. So that, like, just even like, you need a third backup, you need an offsite backup,
have a secure backup.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, have a secure offsite backup in a remote server, and that's something we talk about all the time, is like, why is your backup on your system? Like, it's kind of like, okay, it's there, that's great. Where is it in a secure location? And they're like, why do I need it in a secure location? I'm like, are you serious? Like,
like, defeating the purpose.
That's why, like, I think, for as far as like day-to-day purposes, like, external drives, you know what I mean? Put your backup in a location you control. And a lot of these are encrypted at rest. Right?
Yeah.
So this is an encrypted drive. Someone without the proper permissions can't get in here, for example, right? You can turn on encryption. I don't know that I have it on. I think I do, but.
And so, can you explain encryption at rest a little bit? So is that just, it's routinely being encrypted, or it's encrypted as it comes in? How does that work?
So it's kind of like the repository. So I'll say this. I'll say there's data at rest, data in use, and data in motion, right?
Okay.
So this is someone's data flow, right? And then this is where you analyze, like, at the ingestion point, right? How am I transferring it? Am I using secure mail? Am I doing this, doing that? And then where does it ultimately end up, which is at rest, right? Like, if that data is at rest, then you're encrypting it in the database, right? For example. Yeah. Or if it's in motion, then that email path is encrypted, right? It's a secure email transfer. And if it's in use, is that encrypted as well, as you're using that data. So it's kind of this aspect of, like, encrypting your data at rest could be a hardware level encryption, right? The hard drive itself being encrypted, or it could be software level encryption. Did I apply an encryption algorithm, over the software, right? So.
Okay, so it's more to do with, like, the different phases that data goes through, right? Rest, in use,
right,
in motion, and so at rest is when it's in a hard drive, essentially. That's interesting. I think with there too, so that's from a how to back up your computer. What other kind of advice would you give to individuals who are trying to be more secure about their data as the world is becoming increasingly more digitized?
In a general sense, like, right, most people should exercise using a different password on every account you make, every single one. You shouldn't use the same password for more than one account. You can do something that's associated with the type of account that it is, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, if you're on, like, a religious site, like, make it like Holy Bible 10 ! And then change some letters around, make some capital, add some numbers, instead of change out the vowels for numbers, things like that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like having, like, a complex password. I know most people do. Don't use common passwords like password. Make it a passphrase. Passphrase is something you should use. And then as far as, like, managing your secrets using a password manager, right? Like there's plenty on the apps. There's even iCloud Keychain. I know that one's like kind of, people are like, I don't know about that. You need a third party one. You can use third party ones to manage your passwords.
The problem with iCloud Keychain is how restricted it is, because like I can only access it from my devices, and like, you know, at work I'm using a Windows PC, so like I need to be able to access my passwords there too. And so, at least for me, 1Password has been the best one where I can be in different areas. But yeah, I mean, I think
right. Like, so one you can access online, and you have the password to that. You've memorized. You know, hopefully that's the 1Password you have memorized.
Yeah.
You know, if anything, because then you have access to all your passwords.
Yes.
No, absolutely. Don't write them down on paper. That's for sure. Like, I know we're all privy to that. We've all done it, and you know, I've done it in my own life, so I know better. But I'm just saying, like, as advice, like, don't do it. Don't have them lying around your desk. If you're out in public, try to use privacy screens. Like, for most people, like, there's people who will shoulder surf you. They will literally like just stand over you and watch you type in your password, and then be like, "Oh, I got his password now." You know, that is a thing. And also, like, if you're working on like company information, company stuff, like out in public, like, you don't want to fall privy to that. I personally use a camera cover. Like, I just it's like a little thing. It's on Amazon. It's a couple cents. So I use that. Other general security practices are, you know, try to research the solutions you're going to use. Don't download software off something like some sketchy site. You're like, oh, I need this plugin for Chrome. Like, okay, well, like, check the reviews, see if people made YouTube videos about it online. Like, check some stuff out. You know what I mean? And always stay informed. I mean, those are some of the more general things that everyone on a daily basis does. Changing your passwords regularly, obviously. I think, like, most people, it's going to be passwords, right? Like, most people don't have that much information. But for people who have like small businesses, like, implement these principles of least privilege, right? Like, if you have, even if it's a company of like 3 employees, like, your developer doesn't need the same access as your administrator. You know, like, they don't, straight up. So like, make sure you're not giving everyone just umbrella permissions, and make sure you're creating accounts, creating groups. You know, if you have somewhere that you have like social media content creators, like, make sure there's a group called content creators, and like, you're giving them the right permissions they need. And always kind of like go on the basis of giving them less permission. You know, if you give them less permission and they ask you for more, you can validate the use case, right? Ultimately, like, work is work. Like, you're gonna have to do it anyways. Don't be lazy, and then risk yourself getting, you know, in trouble with anything, right? And
the cost of
there's these government
the cost of being attacked is greater than the cost of having to give them little by little, you know, as their work expands, or if their work expands, right?
And scalability, right? Like, as you scale out with your corporations, like, make sure you're avidly reviewing your posture, right? Like for us, like, we give people leeway, like, when they're new and they're doing more developmental tasks, like, we kind of give them that leeway of like, oh, well, you know, this is a brand new application. You obviously don't have everything turned on here, but that's okay, because you're not dealing with sensitive data, right? And always adjusting the scope and understanding what exactly it is you're working with. Like, maybe at some point you are doing something crazy, like collecting people's social security numbers. Not crazy, but you know what I mean? Like, you need their social security number to validate their identity. So like, then you got to start to think like, okay, do I need to purchase an encryption solution? Like, it's better I do that now than face consequences with the FBI. Like, right? Like, who wants to do that? Absolutely nobody. And I mean, like, there's these principles, right? These practices, like, they're published online. They're open source to anyone. Anyone can go ahead and see them. You know, the General Data Protection Regulation from Europe, from the European Union, that's GDPR. A lot of people often hear, I'm sure people are like, how is this GDPR, and why are they telling me what I need to do with my passwords, right? Well, they're it was the first regulation board, right, so to speak, that came out and was like, okay, well, us on a global scale, on a multinational scale, we need this done. And so anyone who wanted to be involved in that market needed to comply with some of those regulations. And so making sure you're doing like that as you're growing as a company, as a public company. And then also, like, be careful with people's data. CCPA, California So that's kind of like US's version, right? Where they're kind of like a US state was kind of like, okay, well, someone needs to do something so that states all go and fall in line and start to do something. So CPA is kind of its own thing. It's more of like a consumer privacy act, whereas like there's in the financial sector, there was this New York Stock Exchange, right? Group that kind of like for insurance and financial companies also came out with these data protection regulations. So they have their own in New York, and California has their own. And so a lot of companies, like it's kind of like California's is like tech based, like West Coast based, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And East Coast is like East Coast based, so like all those East Coast companies that like insurance companies, auditors, financial banks, they have that regulation. And so it's complicated, but there is that stuff out there, and I'm sure like GDPR is a good one for people who like aren't really sure what sphere they fall under, and then you will find a lot of these overlap. They overlap because the world is kind of, it's not easy, but it is narrow, right? It is narrow in the sense that like there's the standardized ways of doing things, and implementing those depends on what you have in your system, but like generally people are telling you to do the same thing. Turn on firewall, right? Turn on auto updates. It's not that hard, And then those might be more like SOC 2 regulations, like your security operations center, right? So the guy who's like bugging you about your computer software being out of date, sending emails like, maybe update, please. Push through those updates.
They don't send emails anymore. I just get a little notification at the bottom right, and it continuously comes up. And I think it automatically downloads, even if it doesn't necessarily automatically install. So, like, for me, the way it works, I keep getting notified, and then it starts downloading, so my computer starts slowing down throughout the day. And then, and then I can either choose to install it then, or I have a deadline for when I need to install it so that I can do it on my own pace. So our system's relatively nice. The only shitty part is that it will start doing the automatic downloads. So then, like, I'm not trying to download it yet, so my computer starts slowing down. But it's a small price to pay for the protection we're getting with it. So
no, absolutely. I think SOC guys they're a blessing. Like the IT guys will help out so many people. I hardly have to work with them because most of them are my like coworkers on the same project. Like they're like, oh, this is how you do that. Like, oh, you don't know how to do that? Let me show you that real quick. So they're kind of like hilarious in themselves, and I hardly ever have to interact with them. But the few times I have had to interact with them, they're usually kind of the chiller guys in the office. Outside of like when you come to them with a problem, they're kind of like on the inside, they're all like, like.
Well, I'm reminded. I don't know if you've seen the IT Crowd, but it's a good show, and they have similar reactions for all like the simple issues they get called upon for.
Debbie double clickers and stuff. I'm on Clint Talk, so that's there's this guy Clint on TikTok that's kind of like poses as the IT guy, and he's like he can't bug me with this. I got like 10 Jira tickets I got to get through, or he'll be like, hi, this is Clint, like Global IT. Did you submit a Jira ticket? Well, how about you call me back when you submit a Jira ticket?
It's funny how universal some of the IT stuff is. I saw one I saw recently was the personality matrices that they have for like Magic the Gathering. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. Where it's on one side it's the lawful, neutral, chaotic,
the neutral chaos,
the
neutral good, neutral alignment good, chart. Neutral bad,
alignment charts with con. So they have one for IT, and like it was like the lawful good was like, we'll create a Jira ticket for you and resolve the issue. And then you had like the chaotic neutral, won't start working on it until you submit a Jira ticket. There's the like chaotic neutral was we'll do the work if you buy him lunch without creating a ticket. And so it's so interesting how the whole IT infrastructure, at least the whole experience of submitting tickets and getting work done, is a very relatable.
That's why early on early on, I was spending a lot of time in the office because I could like walk to their desk and be like, "Hey, like I can't connect to the internet right now, and I've tried everything."
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's interesting, that whole world. I want to just kind of get us in the closing areas of where do you think it's headed? What you're looking out for in the future? What things you're excited about? What things you're scared about? Where's the world of cybersecurity going?
So I think if anything, in my industry, the pandemic showed us how underprepared we are. How frighteningly underprepared America is
Damn.
for this type of world, for a fully remote world. It's tough. It's tough to see just kind of the whole world get reverted to you being able to access someone's network securely on their office, right? To now having to create all these remote opportunities for people to be able to get onto, right? And flood your virtual proxy networks, just absolutely. It's like you created a DDoS attack for yourself, man. You distributed all your employees across the world, and then you said, access our system that is nowhere near ready to handle this traffic from virtual locations. But go ahead, we have to do it.
You literally went from one access point to like however many employees you have access points, right?
Yeah. and we created this, we expanded the surface area of attacks against our infrastructures. Like essentially, like when you had everyone in one office, your surface area is kind of small, right? Like, and now, you have to think about people connecting to their home networks to, and that too, like, right. And we're talking about like what people can do for themselves, change that fucking password. Like, do not stay on the default stuff on your browser, on your, on your WPA. Make sure you have WPA2 enabled. Never have a public network. Be careful about connecting to public networks when they're free. You're like, oh, free Wi-Fi. Those could be honeypots, man. They could literally be. A honeypot is essentially something sent there to distract you. So it could be a situation where it's like, come join our network, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, all your emails are hacked. All your phone is now part of a botnet, like very easily, like
you've been farming crypto for 3 years.
Yeah, exactly, but like we joke, but yeah, that's kind of like the fear of the world is kind of like having people, and I don't know that it's unreasonable to ask, but it certainly is a lot to ask people to begin treating their home like it's part of the office. Like their network, like they need to become not IT experts, but definitely IT like connoisseurs. In their own world. And I think moving forward, this is going to become much standard. We're going to be in the hybrid area. The thing is, like, there's going to be more travel, so people are going to have to be even more careful. Like now you're going from location A to B. Like, what's to stop a cyber criminal from hopping on to Southwest Airlines flight from like LA to Seattle and knowing fully well there's going to be a shit ton of consultants on that flight? Very little is going to stop them from that. So just making sure, like, moving forward as aware, and even with I know a lot of people are thinking like, oh, quantum computers, that could just going to destroy the cybersecurity space. Like, will cyber criminals be able to fully utilize? I want people to know that no, the cybersecurity world is going to stay a little bit more narrow for a while, right? Unfortunately, IPv4 and IPv6 were not created to be the most secure and the most secure of ideas, right? So cybersecurity, in my opinion, is here to stay. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the NFT stuff, right? So non-fungible tokens in the security sphere there. It'll be exciting, right? Because if you're creating kind of a unique asset of value, right? Like, are we going to see people hacking into other people because they own such a valuable asset, digitally? What are we going to see? And I don't know. It leaves me to ponder and wonder, and it'll be exciting for sure. I think even with Space Force, Space Force to me kind of implies like satellite control. So a way of these transmissions being carried forward, possibly because we have nation states in our satellites trying to intercept these messages, right? So.
Damn. Yeah. It's a constantly changing world now. It's a constantly evolving environment, and different actors start making new things and causing havoc. So, both fun and also, it's kind of the life of a cyber cop, right? Like, you're constantly having to deal with new crimes and figure out how are they doing that, and come up with solutions that can be applied at scale.
There is a huge area of consultants that probably just feel like cyber investigators. You know what I mean?
It's a PI in a certain sense.
Yeah, freaking CSIPI, cybersecurity information, private investigator. I don't know. I'm just making this stuff, but I mean, it's exciting. It's scary, but uncharted seas are scary for a reason. So we'll see.
It's a fun adventure either way. Well, thank you for joining, and that concludes the podcast.
All right, awesome. It was good to